The First Battle of Ypres was a First World War battle fought around Ypres, in western Belgium during October and November 1914. The battle took place as part of the First Battle of Flanders, in which German, French, Belgian and British armies fought from Arras in France to Nieuport on the Belgian coast, for the 10th of October to mid-November. The battles at Ypres began at the end of the race to the sea, which involved reciprocal attempts by the German and Franco-British armies to advance past the northern flank of their opponents. North of Ypres, the fighting continued in the Battle of the Yser, fought between the German Fourth Army and a largely Belgian force. The fighting has been divided into 5 stages: an encounter battle from 19 to 21 October, the Battle of Nieuport from 21 to 24 October, the battles at La Bassée and Arras to the 2nd of November, coincident with more Allied attacks at Ypres, and the Battle of Wyrall, a 4th phase with the last big German offensive, which culminated at the Battle of Non-Bastion on the 11th of November. Then local operations, which faded out in late November. J. Edmonds, the British official historian, wrote that the Second Corps battle at La Bassée could be taken as separate, but that the battles from Arras to Messines and Ypres were better understood as a battle in 2 parts: an offensive by Third Corps and the Cavalry Corps from 12 to 18 October, against which the Germans retired, and an offensive by the German 6th and 4th Armies which from the 30th of October took place mainly north of the Lys. When the battles of Arras and Messines merged with the battles of Ypres, attacks by the BEF, Belgians and a new French 8th Army in Belgium made little progress beyond Ypres, and then the German 4th and 6th Armies took small amounts of ground at great cost to both sides. During the Battle of the Yser and further south at Ypres, Falkenhayn then tried a limited offensive to capture Ypres and Mount Kemmel. Neither side had moved forces to Flanders fast enough to obtain a decisive victory, and by November, both were exhausted, short of ammunition and suffering from collapses in Wyrall. Some infantry units refused orders. The autumn battles in Flanders had quickly become static, attritional operations, unlike the battles of maneuver in the summer. French, British and Belgian troops in improvised field defences repulsed German attacks for 4 weeks. From 21 to 23 October, German reservists had made mass attacks at Nieuport with losses of up to 70% to little effect. Warfare between mass armies, equipped with the weapons of the Industrial Revolution and its later developments, proved to be indecisive, because field fortifications neutralized many classes of offensive weapon. The defensive use of artillery and machine guns had dominated the battlefield, and the ability of the armies to supply themselves and replace casualties prolonged battles for weeks. The German armies engaged 34 divisions in the Flanders battles, the French 12, the British 9, and the Belgian 6, along with Marines and dismounted cavalry. Falkenhayn reconsidered German strategy over the winter, because Vernichtung's strategy and a dictated peace against France and Russia had been shown to be beyond German resources. Falkenhayn intended to detach Russia and France from the Allied coalition by diplomatic as well as military action. A strategy of attrition would make the cost of the war too great, until one enemy negotiated an end to the war. The remaining belligerents would have to negotiate to face the German army concentrated on the remaining front, which would be sufficient to obtain a decisive victory. Background: strategic developments. Eastern Front. On the 9th of October, the first German offensive against Warsaw began with the battles of Warsaw and of Angarod. 4 days later, Przemysl was relieved by the advancing Austro-Hungarians, and the Battle of Chiro. 13 October. The 2nd of November began in Galicia. Czernowitz in the Bukovina was reoccupied by the Austro-Hungarian army on the 22nd of August, and then then lost again to the Russian army on the 28th of October. On the 29th of October, the Ottoman Empire commenced hostilities against Russia, when Turkish warships bombarded Odessa, Sevastopol and Theodosia. Next day Stanislaw in Galicia was taken by Russian forces and the Serbian army began a retreat from the line of the Drina. On the 4th of November, the Russian army crossed the frontier of Turkey in Asia and seized Azov. Britain and France declared war on Turkey on the 5th of November, and next day, Ypres in Armenia was captured. During the Bergman offensive by the Russian army, on the 10th of October, Przemysl was surrounded again by the Russian army. Beginning the second siege, Memel in East Prussia was occupied by the Russians a day later. Ypres was recaptured by the Ottoman army on the 14th of November. The Sultan proclaimed jihad. Next day the Battle of Krakow began and the second Russian invasion of North Hungary commenced. The second German offensive against Warsaw opened with the Battle of Łódź. Great Retreat. The Great Retreat was a long withdrawal by the Franco-British armies to the Marne, from the 24th of August to the 28th of September 1914. After the success of the German armies in the Battle of the Frontiers, after the defeat of the French Fifth Army at the Battle of Charleroi and the BEF in the Battle of Mons, both armies made a rapid retreat to avoid envelopment. A counter-offensive by the French and the BEF at the First Battle of Ypres failed to end the German advance, and the Franco-British retreat continued beyond the Marne. From 5 to 12 September, the First Battle of the Marne ended the retreat and forced the German armies to retire towards the Aisne River, where the First Battle of the Aisne was fought from 13 to 28 September. Tactical developments. Flanders. After the retreat of the French Fifth Army and the BEF, local operations took place from August-October. General Fournier was ordered on the 25th of August to defend the fortress at Maubeuge, which was surrounded 2 days later by the German 7th Reserve Corps. Maubeuge was defended by 14 forts, with the garrison of 30,000 French territorials and c. 10,000 French, British and Belgian stragglers. The fortress blocked the main Cologne-Paris rail line, leaving only the line from Trier to Liège, Brussels, Valenciennes and Cambrai open to the Germans, which was needed to carry supplies southward to the armies on the Aisne and transport troops of the Sixth Army northwards from Lorraine to Flanders. On the 7th of September, the garrison surrendered, after super-heavy artillery from the siege of Namur demolished the forts. The Germans took 32,692 prisoners and captured 450 guns. Small detachments of the Belgian, French and British armies conducted operations in Belgium and northern France against German cavalry and Jaeger. On the 27th of August, a squadron of the Royal Naval Air Service flew to Ostend for reconnaissance sorties between Bruges, Ghent and Ypres. British Marines landed at Dunkirk on the night of 19-20 September, and on the 28th of September, a battalion occupied Lille. The rest of the brigade occupied Kassel on the 30th of September and scouted the country in motorcars. An RNAS armored car section was created by fitting vehicles with bulletproof steel. On the 2nd of October, the Marine Brigade was sent to Antwerp, followed by the rest of the Naval Division on the 6th of October, having landed at Dunkirk on the night of 4/5 October. From 6 to 7 October, the 7th Division and the 3rd Cavalry Division landed at Zeebrugge. Naval forces collected at Dover were formed into a separate unit, which became the Dover Patrol, to operate in the Channel and off the French-Belgian coast. BEF. In late September, Joffre and French discussed the transfer of the BEF the Aisne to Flanders, to unify British forces on the continent. Short shortened the British lines of communication from England and to defend Antwerp and the Channel ports, despite the inconvenience of British troops crossing French lines of communication. When French forces were moving north after the Battle of the Aisne, Joffre agreed, subject to a proviso, that French would make individual British units available for operations as soon as they arrived. On the night of 1/2 October, the transfer of the BEF from the Aisne front began in great secrecy. Marches were made at night and billeted troops were forbidden to venture outside in daylight. On the 3rd of October, a German wireless message was intercepted, which showed that the BEF was still believed to be on the Aisne. Second Corps moved from the night of 3/4 October and Third Corps followed from the 6th of October, leaving a brigade behind with First Corps, which stayed until the night of 13/14 October. Second Corps arrived around Abbeville from 8 to 9 October and concentrated to the northeast around Genneverny, Guischart, Le Beauisle and Ray, preparatory to an advance on Bethune. The 2nd Cavalry Division arrived at St. Paul and Hesdin on the 9th of October and the 1st Cavalry Division arrived a day later. GHQ left Férens-Tardenois and arrived at Saint-Omer on the 13th of October. Third Corps began to assemble around Saint-Omer and Hazebrouck on the 11th of October, then moved behind the left flank of Second Corps, to advance on Bailleul and Armentières. First Corps arrived at Hazebrouck on the 19th of October and moved eastwards to Ypres, raced to the sea after a tour of the front on the 15th of September. The new Chief German General Staff, General Falkenhayn, planned to continue the withdrawal of the right flank of the German armies in France from the Aisne, to gain time for a strategic regrouping, by moving the 6th Army from Lorraine. A decisive result was intended to come from the offensive of the 6th Army, but on the 18th of September, French attacks endangered the German northern flank instead, and the 6th Army used the first units from Lorraine to repulse the French as a preliminary. The French used undamaged rail and communications networks to move troops faster than the Germans, but neither side could begin a decisive attack, having to send units forward piecemeal against reciprocal attacks of the opponent in the race to the sea. A German attack on the 24th of September forced the French onto the defensive, and Joffre reinforced the northern flank of the Second Army. As BEF units arrived, operations began piecemeal on the northern flank. The Belgian army refused the request by Joffre to leave the national redoubt of Belgium and sortie against German communications. A Franco-British offensive was substituted towards Lille and Antwerp. The Allied troops managed to advance towards Lille and the Lys River, but were stopped by German attacks in the opposite direction on the 20th of October. The race ended on the Belgian coast around the 17th of October, when the last open area from Dixmude to the North Sea was occupied by Belgian troops withdrawing from Antwerp after the siege of Antwerp. The outflanking attempts resulted in indecisive encounter battles through Artois and Flanders, at the Battle of Le Basset, the Battle of Messines and the Battle of Armentières. Prelude. Terrain. The northeast of France and the southwest Belgium is known as Flanders. West of a line between Arras and Calais in the northwest are chalk downlands, covered with soil sufficient for arable farming. East of the line, the land declines in a series of spurs into the Flanders plain, bounded by canals linking Douai, Bethune, Saint-Omer and Calais. To the southeast, canals run between Lens, Lille, Roubaix and Courtrai. The Lys River from Courtrai to Ghent, and to the northwest lies the sea. The plain is almost flat, apart from a line of low hills from Cassel eastwards to Mont des Gats, Mont-Noir, Mont-Rouge, Scherpenberg and Mount Kemmel. From Kemmel, a low ridge lies to the northeast, declining in elevation past Ypres through Whiteskeet, Gelleveld and Passchendaele. curving north then northwest to Dixmude where it merges with the plain. A coastal strip is about 10 miles wide, near sea level and fringed by sand dunes. Inland the ground is mainly meadow, cut by canals, dikes, drainage ditches and roads built up on causeways. The Lys, Yser and Upper Scheldt are canalized, and between them the water level underground is close to the surface, rises further in the autumn and fills any dip, the sides of which then collapse. The ground surface quickly turns to a consistency of cream cheese, and on the coast movement is confined to roads, except during frosts. In the rest of the Flanders plain were woods and small fields, divided by hedgerows planted with trees and fields cultivated from small villages and farms. The terrain was difficult for infantry operations because of the lack of observation, impossible for mounted action because of the many obstructions, and awkward for artillery because of the limited view. South of Le Basset Canal around Lens and Bethune was a coal mining district full of slag heaps, pitheads and miners' houses. North of the canal, the city of Lille, Tourcoing and Roubaix formed a manufacturing complex, with outlying industries at Armentières, Camins, Halluin and Menin, along the Lys River, with isolated sugar beet and alcohol refineries and a steelworks near Yser-sur-le-Lys. Intervening areas were agricultural, with wide roads, which in France were built on shallow foundations or were unpaved mud tracks. Narrow pavé roads ran along the frontier and inside Belgium. In France, the roads were closed by the local authorities during thaws to preserve the surface and marked by barrières fermées signs, which were ignored by British lorry drivers. The difficulty of movement after the end of summer absorbed much of the labor available on road maintenance, leaving field defenses to be built by frontline soldiers. Tactics. In October, Kitchen of the British Secretary of State for War forecast a long war and placed orders for the manufacture of a large number of field, medium and heavy guns and howitzers, sufficient to equip a 24-division army. The order was soon increased by the War Office, but the rate of shell manufacture had a more immediate effect on operations. While the BEF was still on the Aisne front, ammunition production for field guns and howitzers was 10,000 shells a month, and only 100 shells per month were being manufactured for 60-pounder guns. The War Office sent another 101 heavy guns to France during October. As the contending armies moved north into Flanders, the flat terrain and obstructed view, caused by the number of buildings, industrial concerns, tree foliage and field boundaries, forced changes in British artillery methods. Lack of observation was remedied in part by decentralizing artillery to infantry brigades and by locating the guns in the front line, but this made them more vulnerable, and several batteries were overrun in the fighting between Arras and Ypres. Devolving control of the guns made concentrated artillery fire difficult to arrange, because of a lack of field telephones and the obscuring of signal flags by mists and fog. Cooperation with French forces to share the British heavy artillery was implemented, and discussions with French gunners led to a synthesis of the French practice of firing a field artillery rifle before infantry moved to the attack and then ceasing fire, with the British preference for direct fire at observed targets, which was the beginning of the development of creeping barrages. During the advance of the Third Corps and an attack on Meterin, the 4th Division issued divisional artillery orders, which stressed the concentration of the fire of the artillery, although during the battle the gunners fired on targets of opportunity, since German positions were so well camouflaged. As the fighting moved north into Belgian Flanders, the artillery found that shrapnel shells had little effect on buildings and called for high explosive ammunition. During a general attack on the 18th of October, the German defenders achieved a defensive success due to the disorganized nature of the British attacks, which only succeeded where close artillery support was available. The unexpected strength of the German Fourth Army opposite compounded British failings, although the partly trained, poorly led and badly equipped German Reserve Corps suffered high casualties. German tactics developed during the battles around Ypres, with cavalry still effective during the early maneuvering, although just as hampered by hedges and fenced fields, railway lines and urban growth as the Allied cavalry, which made the ground far better suited to defensive battle. German accounts stress the accuracy of Allied sniper fire, which led troops to remove the spike from Pickelhaube helmets and for officers to carry rifles to be less conspicuous. Artillery remained the main infantry killer, particularly French 75mm field guns, firing shrapnel at ranges lower than 1,000 yards. Artillery in German reserve units was far less efficient due to lack of training, and fire often fell short. In the lower ground between Ypres and the higher ground to the southeast and east, the ground was drained by many streams and ditches, divided into small fields with high hedges and ditches. Roads were unpaved and the area was dotted with houses and farmsteads. Observation was limited by trees, and open spaces could be commanded from covered positions and made untenable by small arms and artillery fire. As winter approached, the views became more open as woods and copses were cut down by artillery bombardments and the ground became much softer, particularly in the lower-lying areas. Plans. The French, Belgian and British forces in Flanders had no organization for unified command, but General Foch had been appointed Commandant de Groupe des Armées Acutes du Nord on the 4th of October by Joffre. The Belgian army managed to save 80,000 men from Antwerp and retire to the Yser, and although not formally in command of British and Belgian forces, Foch obtained cooperation from both contingents. On the 10th of October, Foch and French agreed to combine French, British and Belgian forces north and east of Lille, from the Lys to the Scheldt. Foch planned a joint advance from Ypres to Nieuport, towards the line from Roulers, Thourout and Gistels, just south of Ostend. Foch intended to isolate the German Third Reserve Corps, which was advancing from Antwerp, from the main German force in Flanders. French and Belgian forces were to push the Germans back against the sea, as French and British forces turned southeast and closed up to the Lys River from Menin to Ghent, to cross the river and attack the northern flank of the German armies. Falkenhayn sent the Fourth Army headquarters to Flanders, to take over the Third Reserve Corps and its heavy artillery. 20 batteries of heavy field howitzers, 12 batteries of 210mm howitzers and 6 batteries of 100mm guns, after the siege of Antwerp. The 22, 23, 26 and 27th Reserve Corps of the 6th New Reserve Corps, formed from volunteers after the outbreak of the war, were ordered from Germany to join the 3rd Reserve Corps on the 8th of October. The Reserve Corps were poorly trained and ill-equipped, but on the 10th of October, Falkenhayn issued a directive that the Fourth Army was to cross the Yser, advance regardless of losses and isolate Dunkirk and Calais, then turn south towards Saint-Omer, with the Sixth Army to the south, which was to deny the Allies an opportunity to establish a secure front and transfer troops to the north. The Fourth Army was to inflict an annihilating blow on the French, Belgian and BEF forces in French and Belgian Flanders. Battle of the Yser. French, British and Belgian troops covered the Belgian-British withdrawal from Antwerp towards Ypres and the Yser from Dixmude Nieuport. On a 35-kilometer front. The new German Fourth Army was ordered to capture Dunkirk and Calais by attacking from the coast to the junction with the Sixth Army. German attacks began on the 18th of October, coincident with the battles around Ypres, and gained a foothold over the Yser at Tervit. The French 42nd Division at Nieuport detached a brigade to reinforce the Belgians, and German heavy artillery was countered on the coast by Allied ships under British command, which bombarded German artillery positions and forced the Germans to attack further inland. On the 24th of October, the Germans attacked 15 times and managed to cross the Yser on a 5-kilometer front. The French sent the rest of the 42nd Division to the center, but on the 26th of October, the Belgian commander Félix Wielemans ordered the Belgian army to retreat, until overruled by the Belgian king. Next day, sluice gates on the coast at Nieuport were opened, which flooded the area between the Yser and the railway embankment, running north from Dixmude. On the 30th of October, German troops crossed the embankment at Ramsgapel, but were forced to retire the following evening, as the waters rose. The floods reduced the fighting to local operations, which diminished until the end of the battle on the 30th of November.